All right, just to let people know, I know that Dr. Tierney wanted to come back, at least after our conversation, after her presentation on Wednesday. We had originally scheduled her to be here, but at the last minute, something came up that she could not attend. So we're trying to bring her back on Wednesday. Matter of fact, that's why we even set up a meeting for Friday, because we wanted to make sure that she could come back as quickly as possible to discuss with us. But unfortunately, that did not transpire. So we're hoping we can get her on Wednesday meeting. All right. So I apologize to the members, but I just found out late yesterday myself that she had a conflict. Anyhow, with that, we do have with us Jimmy Gianato, who's the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And Jimmy, if you would come forward and tell us, just recap on your involvement with the chemical spill, also looking at what's being worked on now in regards to trying to test the waters and bring and flush the systems and so forth. And then also you were talking with me about things that we could be looking at in the future to help prevent from anything like this happening again. So, Mr. Gianato, thank you for being here.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jimmy Gianato. I'm the Director of the state's Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. First, I want to thank you all for your patience with me. I know I've been asked to be here a couple of times, but as you all know, we've been extremely busy the last few weeks just trying to deal with the response piece of this crisis. So I thank you for your patience there. I won't go into a lot of the details of the event. I think most of you already know that, but on the early morning hours of January the 9th, the Division of Environmental Protection received an air quality complaint on US 119. Their air inspectors went up and found that there was a tank leaking at Freedom Industries and requested that Freedom notify the DEP spill line, which comes into our office, and we answer and manage for the division or the Department of Environmental Protection. We received that call around noon that day, and personnel from DEP's Emergency Response Unit went up to the site and began working with Freedom to try to mitigate the situation. As you know, early on, they reported that there were only about 2,500 to 5,000 gallons that leaked from that tank. We know now, based on the information they've given us, that that quantity is around 10,000 gallons. That product made its way into the Elk River and eventually downstream into the intake of West Virginia America's water system. Since that time, we have been actively engaged in trying to make sure the basic needs of the citizens have been taken care of. Around 4:50 on that Thursday evening, I received a call from the Department of Health and Human Resources Threat Preparedness Office that they had just received notice from their environmental health group that West Virginia American was about to issue a do not use order on the water system. Because of the planning that we have had ongoing with various state and federal partners, we immediately realized that that was going to have a significant impact on the Kanawha Valley. Because of the Bluestone Dam planning that we've been doing, we knew that the loss of that water plant affected a lot of people in several locations. The difference in what we had been planning for in this event was those plans involved totally losing that plant for an extended period of time, where with this scenario, we didn't lose the plant, but we lost the capability to produce potable water from that plant. So we had some plans in place that, and some information in place that helped us with this response. Just to give you an idea of what we've done since then, we've delivered from FEMA 456 trailer loads of water, which translates to about 17 million bottles. We have received donated water, and this is as of a couple days ago, so it's not the most current, but equivalent to about 1.7 million bottles. So roughly 20 million bottles of water have been distributed. West Virginia American has purchased about 20 additional truckloads in the last few days. We've distributed that, and they're also still providing bulk water. So we're still providing water in the communities in the form of tankers that citizens can go and get water. At one point, we had 7 civil support teams from the National Guard on station here working to do the testing with the water company. So this response has been ongoing for several weeks, and it will continue to continue to go on until everyone is satisfied that we've done everything we can to make sure that the water system is safe. There have been over 2,200 samples taken. All the system has been cleared below the 1 part per million that the CDC said is the acceptable level. All 26 zones, with the exception of 1 fire hydrant now, have been cleared at the level of 10 parts per billion. And they're reflushing that area, which is in Boone County, and retesting it as we speak. We've gone in and tested all the schools. All the schools have tested below the 10 parts per billion threshold, and we continue to provide capabilities to respond to the schools in the event that they have situations arise. Excuse me. As we continue to look at this and we look at what happened, the governor's already asked us to do an after action on this event, and we've had not had the time to get a lot of the details together. But one of the things that we will look at as we move forward is how the interagency partners work better together. Currently, when those calls come in, we notify DEP. DEP then will send personnel out to the sites. They generally know where all these water intakes are and make notification, as they did in this case, to the water company. And I think you all have probably heard from the water company, how they responded and what they did and the actions that they took and the reasons that they took those actions. So we will continue to develop that partnership. Part of Senate Bill 373 has that interagency piece in it, and we're already looking at things we can do to enhance that with some GIS capability, with mapping and sharing information between the 3 agencies. Our office also manages the SARA Title II program that the facilities file. We have about 9,000 facilities that report chemicals to us, and currently we manage that. There's 2 ways those reports come in. One is some facilities file those electronically, and they go into an EPA program that's basically given to us to use. The other way is we receive paper filings. We're looking right now at mandating everyone file electronically, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to have a searchable database that we can go out and quickly query this information when something like this happens. If you were to look at the file drawers of Tier 2 forms, they're tremendous. So by going to totally electronic filing, that will minimize or maximize our ability to be able to find these documents when things happen. The facility here in question, or Freedom Industries had filed their Tier 2 reports, but they had filed them under the name of Etowah Terminals, which was the previous owner. And when everyone was looking at the local level and at the state level for Freedom, nothing came up because they had not notified us that they had changed their name. So, but we were able, based on the location, to find the information and pass that on to the first responders that were on scene that morning. We as always, with any event, will continue to look at how we can do things better. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you all may have about our response. And if I don't have the answers, I'll be glad to try to get answers for you.
Thank you, Mr. Gianato. Questions? While members are looking at this, you mentioned about they changed the name so nothing came up under Freedom Industries in regards to the chemical, but then you found the chemical from the location, and that's how the first responders responded as far as knowing what type of chemical. However, 12 days later in the bankruptcy court proceedings, it was discovered there was another chemical, PPH.
Yes, sir.
Was that in the original?
No, sir.
That was
No,
not
sir.
in the
They
original?
only filed MCHM.
That was it?
Yes, sir.
And then,
Well, they filed several other chemicals, but of the leaked chemicals, that was the only one that was filed.
okay, so even with the filing of MCHM, that wasn't a complete, I guess it wasn't complete information, because PPH is another chemical that even the first responders didn't even know
That's
was
correct.
there, or anybody else.
That's correct.
And where was the fall down on that? Was that the Freedom Industries not properly filing their paperwork in
Yes,
regards to
sir.
chemical site?
Their paperwork indicated that the product that they had in the tank was pure MCHM. As we know now, it was mixed with PPH, and but nowhere on the filings did we have anything on that. When we were notified of that, we actually had to go out and start trying to identify what PPH was, and then we basically backtracked the manufacturer of the product and to get the information that we needed, so we could start looking and providing that information to CDC and others to determine what impact it may have had.
Do we know if there's any other type of chemicals that were there now that do you all know if there's other chemicals included that wasn't necessarily revealed?
Not that we're aware of. DEP filed filed an order with Freedom requiring them to disclose anything else they had on site, and in their response, they're basically saying that was the only thing there. In fact, their folks, I think, had told Mike Dorsey on the scene that they had forgotten that this product was mixed in with the MCHM.
They forgot. Okay. Now, in regards to the response, the emergency responders, I know that there's a book that helps emergency responders with all types of chemicals, and then it gives advisory of how to proceed if you had to come in contact.
Right.
What does it say about MCHM and PPH in regards to emergency responders as far as protection of them?
Okay, there's a couple of marking systems that are used. One is the DOT marking system, which is if you see a truck on the highway, you'll see a placard on that truck with a number in it. That number references back to, as the Senator said, a reference manual that the Department of Transportation provides that gives guidance to first responders. But that's not necessarily the case with a fixed facility. With a fixed facility, most of those use what's called the UN marking system, which if you've seen any of the media reports on Freedom, you've seen the photograph of the tank with this diamond on the tank that has multicolors. Those multicolors represent health hazards, fire hazards, or flammability hazards, oxidation hazards, and other types of hazards. So on that tank, and if I remember right, there's a number 2 in the blue section of that tank, which means moderately or minorly hazard, based on the UN marking system.
So what did they wear any type of protection gear going into it at all?
No, my understanding is that the response personnel that have been working on the scene have not used any additional personal protective equipment other than their normal clothing and gloves and helmets.
Okay, and also a question of sampling. Did DEP or anybody take samples to test, make sure the chemicals there? I know that I guess the FBI or whatever, federal investigators had come in chemical suits and salt and so forth, and I guess they also did something inside the tanks to look
Right.
at it. But other than the federal investigators, have state looked at?
I'm fairly sure DEP has taken samples. I know that we've, as all of you, we've taken numerous water samples, including the crude that was sent to the labs. The crude MCHM was used to help develop the testing protocol that we use to test the water samples. So there have been samples taken. Now, what the status of some of those and with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, I don't know. But I know there were samples taken.
I have other questions, but I want to give members an opportunity to ask before I give Senator Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming here today. I appreciate you being here and trying to answer all the questions and give us your report. Currently, are there any state minimum requirements set into law as to allowing a utility to lift a do not use order? Is there any procedures that they must follow before they're allowed to lift that order?
That's probably a question for the Bureau of Public Health. I think my understanding is they're following a procedure similar to what they use with the bull water advisories, but that's something you need to ask them.
So I direct the question to Bureau of Health, if there's a minimum number of outside labs that have to consult or something of that fact, and they'd be able to.
I can tell you, on the water testing, we're following the EPA requirements that I think it's 40% of the samples have to be validated at 2 different labs, and 60% at a single lab for the sampling to be considered accurate.
So that's the federal, and
Yes.
we need to look and see if that's in state law and make
Correct.
sure that we have it on our books. Okay.
And it may already be there. I
Sure,
don't know the
absolutely.
answer to that.
Yeah. Why did the Kanawha County Health Department and the other health departments in the 9 counties learn of this crisis via the news and not be contacted by an outside group letting them know what's going on?
Yeah. I can't speak to the health departments.
That's health department as well.
I know on the 450 call that I was on, emergency response officials from Kanawha County were on the call with us, as well as the Bureau of Public Health and others.
Okay.
So how they got their notification, I know that Dr. Gupta has made reference to receiving notification from the media, but from what I understand, that notification he received then was dealing with the odor complaint earlier in the day.
On that phone call you just referenced, was the utility, West Virginia American Water, on that phone call?
Yes, sir.
They were. And is there a requirement in state law that when a leak does happen, that the DMP inform utilities that may be downstream from a leak? Do you know of that?
I don't know if there's a requirement, but I know that usually they do, and they had notified the water company on this. In fact, Mr. McIntyre has testified that they took additional treatment precautions because they knew this was coming toward their plant.
To the next question, the governor stated that they're looking to develop a way to do in-home testing currently. What are they going to have to do differently to do in-home testing versus from a tap at a school or from a fire hydrant out there? What's different whenever they come into a home? When they use those same cleaning chemicals and taps at schools that you use at home?
I think the biggest difference that we're looking at is the authority to go into a private residence. And so, you can't just walk into someone's home and say, we want to test your water. And so we're looking at, how do we do that? What types of permissions do we need? What types of waivers do we need as far as individuals? And this is still being reviewed, so there's no set plan as to who actually is going to go onto the person's property. If there's anything that has to be done to the plumbing, who's going to do that work? How do we validate that the home was previously flushed and has met the flushing requirements that have been laid out? So those are some of the things that we're trying to look at. And then the other is, how do you get a valid statistical analysis that's going to be acceptable to everyone as to how many homes you sample and what elevations do you sample? There's a lot of those variables that are currently being reviewed to determine what's the best way forward on this.
Also, what penalties are in place if a leak is not reported by a company? And in this sense, Freedom Industries did not report that PPH was part of the leak, or is the state pursuing penalties on them for withholding that information? That chemical did not leak?
That would be a DEP
That'd be in their DEP
question. I do know there are requirements for, and the word used is immediate reporting of any spill that's going to impact a waterway. So, but I know DEP has issued some orders against Freedom, but those are issues that we're not directly involved in, and there are probably some legal issues that are going to be dealt with in court. So,
one more, the DEP, going off Senator Unger's question, mentioned they're going to be doing core samples, and the reason for these core samples is to try to figure out how far down into the soil the chemicals leached, and from there they could determine how long the leaking has taken place. Do you know if those core samples have started?
No,
on
sir.
those sites?
I don't.
You don't know if they have or not? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Laird?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did the state activate the Emergency Operations Center during this incident?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was that done immediately, and when was it discontinued?
Yes, sir. We were on the 450 call. That call lasted about 15 to 20 minutes. I had, at that time that evening, I actually had personnel from FEMA in my office with me while we were on the call, and our staff there. So as soon as we hung up, we began the activation process of bringing people into the EOC. Our prime concern at that point was to try to get the word out. So the counties began activating their ring down or their reverse 911 and other methods that they have. The governor's office immediately began trying to get media together so we could try to get some press conferences out. We made calls to the media to let them know, and then of course West Virginia American followed their processes that they would notify the media for these types of things as well.
Again, I guess the purpose of that is to create an incident command process where you have multiple agencies in the same room.
Correct, yes, sir.
As it relates to your concerns about interagency cooperation.
That's correct.
As far as the composition of that interagency, did that include federal, state, and local representatives?
Yes, sir. In the EOC, it took about an hour to get everybody in. We had representatives from DEP, state police, Department of Agriculture, Department of Highways, FEMA, and I'm just trying to remember back that night, but almost every agency that normally staffs the EOC was there.
Okay. I guess the difference between this incident, we have a lot of experience with the interagency cooperative element as far as incident command through the
Yes, sir.
Emergency Operations Center, but in this instance where you have private sector, corporate entity, that I think in terms of your after action review would be interesting if you introduce that into the equation. From your experience with snow emergencies and other things where you're purely dealing with the dynamic involving
Yes,
government
sir.
entities in an interagency sense, what did the introduction of corporate
We actually put a liaison at the water company to report back to the EOC so that we would have a direct line of communications. We put personnel from the National Guard there. Of course, the National Guard was in the EOC as well as DHHR. In instances like this, DHHR normally establishes a separate operations center downtown where they bring their key components of DHHR together, and then we have a liaison back to that. But one of the things that we've been working on over the last years, we have an infrastructure protection group that looks at working with the private sector, the business community, because in a flood or another disaster, one of the key things is the quicker you can get the private sector back up and operating, then the quicker you can start restoring things to normal. And our primary concern within those first couple hours was trying to make sure we addressed the hospitals, the nursing homes, and those types of facilities immediately, and getting the word out to the general public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair Manypenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Gianato, for coming today. I'd like to know what the responsibilities have been or are for Division of Homeland Security, and what protocols you have in place for emergency response, such as this situation that we've had here. One of the reasons I want to ask this is because I'd like to know if you all took the direction, if you directed the investigation you started out with, and then who implemented the emergency response. And where I'm trying to get with this is, from everything that I've seen, it doesn't appear that anybody responded for almost 24 hours after the report was spilled.
Well, let me go back to what I said earlier. We received the call. Actually, DEP received the first call on this directly to their air quality group at 8 that morning. And they sent personnel out immediately to investigate that. Their air quality personnel actually found the leak and had the company then report it to the spill line. And then immediately after that, the DEP personnel responded. Now, the do not use issue came in around 5 o'clock that evening. We received the call at 4:50 in the evening, and we literally within minutes began activating the emergency operations plan. Our role was primary coordination, to bring the agencies together to make sure that whatever needs are out there get met. We're not an investigative agency, so we don't go out and do an investigation of the event. That's the regulatory agency's responsibility, which in this case would be DEP. Our main mission initially in this was to supply water. And one of the things that we knew early on was we were not going to be able to find enough water locally to be able to meet the needs. So that's when we reached out. The governor called FEMA and discussed with FEMA the ability to get an emergency declaration from the president, which opened up those federal resources to us that come out of the federal supplies to bring water in. But our primary goal in this is not the response or the investigation of what happened, but it's the response to try to mitigate the situation, working with the other agencies to bring the resources to bear that they need.
Now, were you in charge of mandating DEP to respond to this, or do we have too many chiefs and not enough Indians?
No, we don't mandate that they respond. They have the statutory responsibility to these. We simply manage that 24-hour watch line for them and then provide that information to them. But they immediately, when we got the call at noon and referred it to their hazardous or their emergency response unit, they immediately went to the site. I think, I guess looking back, if we'd have known there was 10,000 gallons in the river versus a lower amount, but I think everyone thought that the water treatment plant, based on what we're hearing from the water company, would be able to handle this product as it came through. And I think
have concerns because, we could have maybe held some of this chemical at bay from getting down to the water intake if we had put booms up sooner after having the spill reported. And that's one of the concerns I have, and I was just wondering why that wasn't implemented sooner.
that's something you're going to have to ask DEP, but I think they put out booms,
24 hours later.
I can't answer that. I was on the site about 24 hours, actually not even 24 hours later, but there were booms out when I was there.
Dr. Karen had indicated that they are doing testing of the crude MCHM. However, she indicated that they're getting the crude MCHM to test from Eastman, not from the tank. Do you have samples that has been taken from the tank that we can have, make sure that we can
That's something I'll have to.
actual chemicals that are in this particular test?
We'll have to ask DEP if they do. I know there was a sample that we had to do the initial development of the testing for the crude MCHM. But now what other samples they have, I don't know. I'll be glad to ask and get that answer for you.
And just to touch base on something that Senator Walters had indicated, had talked about, was the orders and samples. Are you working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service or any soil scientists to determine, the porosity of the soil in regards to the viscosity of the chemical and how long it would take to penetrate into the soil, to determine the length of time that this chemical may have been leaking into the soil due to the depth and breadth of the chemical in the soil?
Our agency is not. That DEP is responsible for the remediation of the site. That's their statutory authority. So I know they're working with a variety of people, including EPA and others, but I can't tell you if NRCS has been on site.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Stollings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look at this as first of all, I want to thank you and all the EMS people that really communicated well with the folks down in the coal fields that were also impacted by this. And I know there was, the local folks were just there forever. I mean, just tirelessly.
Yes, sir. And that's a key thing that's been missed in a lot of the coverage of this event, that there were people on the ground. We talk about providing water, but there are people on the ground that are actually out there handing it out and taking it to people. And, they're the ones that are out there getting the work done. So that they need to be thanked a little bit for their efforts that they've put forward.
Absolutely, and again, I think there was a feeling in the peripheral area that we were more interested in, I think, just having some water handy. I think people forget that they should have 3 days of water and things like that. In fact, I didn't have it either, so I was going to various refrigerators, seeing if I had any extra water around. But the other thing I think that we might be missing is this material is already out there on site that we could gather a sample from or whatever. But we also know that this material must have been used, and we must have some experience on it around the coal mines itself. And again, I know you're not the Bureau of Public Health, I know you're not DEP, but are you familiar with any of the on-site issues with this chemical that's apparently been used in the coal industry for some time? Whether it's looked at as something that's really, really dangerous, or if it's looked at as something just another type of soap or something that you use around the mine.
We have never had, to my knowledge, a call of a spill of this product before. I know it's been used in the coal industry for years. We've not had any complaints of health issues from it. And again, we wouldn't be the agency that would normally receive those. If there was a spill of it, we would normally receive that call on the spill. Talking to people that have worked around it, they've worked around it for years and not had any problems. But we've not. One of the things that we've looked at early on was this product listed as a hazardous substance or an extremely hazardous substance? Because a couple of years ago, after the Bayer incident, the legislature gave us some additional authorities that related to extremely hazardous chemicals. And this was not listed as a toxic chemical on any of the list, or what EPA calls the list of lists, that would have been on anybody's radar. And I think that's a key thing as you look forward to legislation, is how do you close the gaps on these products that aren't the real bad, dangerous chemicals that are out there, and these that could be mildly harmful if you're exposed to them in a different type of setting. So I think that's an important distinction that we need to make. We have a lot of authorities, DEP has a lot of authorities over the extremely hazardous products, but it's the other things that, I think that this bill is going to address that will close some of those loopholes.
Well, again, I just want to emphasize that the on-site material at the, in the coal industry might give us a tool to learn more from, and just, again, I don't think we drink it on the coal side, obviously, but there is some topical or touch factors. And again, this is a tool in our toolbox.
And that may be a good source for the Bureau of Public Health to look at long-term exposure effects.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Delegate Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again today
Yes,
for coming in, Mr. Gianato. You earlier testified that early on, all the schools, I guess their water supply had been tested, it was tested okay for
Yes, sir.
consumption, et cetera.
All the schools were tested at 1 part per million, which is the CDC set level. They all tested clear for that. We have gone back and have retested the schools at 10 parts per billion, and all the schools have cleared at that as well.
So yesterday, it's reported in the media today that there was 4 schools that the students were dismissed because of either from smell or from
Yes, sir.
I guess there was some people a couple of people that possibly passed out that had ingested fumes.
That's
How do we
correct.
explain that to the public if we've told them it's okay to consume it, and then we have this happen yesterday?
We've not gotten any reports back on what the actual cause of their illnesses were. We did send teams in and resampled those schools prior to any flushing, and all of those schools came back at less than 10 parts per billion. So they all tested clean or clear again at the threshold of below 10 parts per billion.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on Senator Stollings' comments about the chemical on the MCHM, I have people from my district, which is 115 miles away, that are concerned because we have 2 cleaning plants on the Buchanan River that are very close to the Buchanan. The Buchanan River is the only source of our water supply in Upshur County. And they have a great concern about that chemical and how it's stored, and of course, it's been used there for years, and we've never had a problem, but it's a concern for not just the people in the 9 counties.
Thank you. We have some other questions, Jimmy, but I just want to make sure that Mr. Ireland's not here. Mr. Ireland's not here? Okay, we'll have to reschedule again. We'll just continue with questions. Delegate Ambler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question, Director, concerning the water sampling. Typically, when something like this, when was the first samples taken at the West Virginia Water to check after the toxicity was determined to be a shutdown? And as those samples were being taken, will they follow through the discharge line out into the 9 counties at various levels so that we could see how that thing had traveled through the system, and then, you know, have some basis to what the actual at the contaminant source versus, say, maybe in a Boone County or some other?
Yes,
do you
sir.
have that information? Is there some way of tracking that?
If you go to our website, dhsem.wv.gov, every sample that's been taken is listed on that website. I think the first sample results came back, and I may be wrong because we were up for 24 hours straight, but I think the first samples came back on the 10th. They began sampling as soon as they realized at the water plant they had an issue. Then we began looking at, there was no known method to test for this product in water when this happened. So what had to be done was a method had to be developed to do the testing that needed to be done. So we worked with some industry experts. We worked with the Bureau of Public Health's lab to develop that protocol. EPA was involved. They looked at the protocol that was developed. They actually helped tweak that protocol so that we had a common protocol that we were using across all the labs. We were able to find within the first couple of days labs in Pittsburgh and in, I think it was Canton, Ohio, that could implement the same testing process. So we began shipping test results to different labs. We always tried to use more than one lab so we could validate the samples, and they randomly went out throughout the system. West Virginia American did some hydraulic models to determine the water flows, and working with their engineers and the National Guard CST teams, that's how they determined where the samples were taken. I'd have to go back to the spreadsheets to look at what time, what samples were taken where, but there were samples taken in numerous locations as well as on the rivers. We were in contact with the state of Ohio and the state of Kentucky because, as this product moved its way down the river, there were some concerns downstream for it. So we were in discussions with the city of Cincinnati and the city of Lexington, to make sure that their systems didn't get contaminated as well.
The toxicity of the spill where it originated versus, say, 100 miles down, or more specifically, from the intake to the 60 miles of American water supply there. Was there any, to how quickly it traveled through that? Because I've been wondering why that when we have this toxicity level suddenly show up, that the intake, and the chemicals that I think someone said they thought they could handle it, but when it entered into the storage tanks and things would be going out, to how quickly that chemical spread from the original to get to the far end of the 9 county and, and jeopardize 300,000 person water supply.
I'd have to get the information. Off the top of my head, I don't know how fast it moved through, but I know we have testing results throughout the system that we can probably build that.
I think that would be an interesting thing to note, how quickly this contaminant managed to get through, the water system and bring this kind of havoc. If someone could, maybe, supply that information, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Well, it'll take somebody smarter than me, but we'll find the person that can do that for you.
Jeanette, could you work with council to obtain that information for our next meeting on Wednesday?
Yes, sir.
And we can have it as a written
Sure.
response, if that's okay. Thank you, Delegate. Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Nett for being here. I too echo Senator Stollings' remarks in the sense that I think your department has done an extraordinary job in handling this crisis. You were there at the beginning. I forget how many bottles, millions of gallons of water we've heard that you've dispersed. So I think with your EMS, EMT workers, I think you've done a tremendous job.
Thank you,
with
sir.
What you've done.
It's-
You're not DEP, you're not Department of Health. You come in afterwards, and I appreciate how you come in, especially considering this has been the coldest winter we've had in a long time, and we've had to deal with those crises too. So I appreciate the job you've done. I thank you, but I also have a couple of questions that may not sound like I thank you, but I am.
Sure.
No, I truly do think you've done a great job. I have looked at your sampling results, and you are correct. You started on the 10th, was your first sample. I'm curious on the turnaround for when you take a sample, when you get those results put on your website, when do you know those results?
We, the first day or so, we had to create that web page. So I think it took us, in the beginning, it took us a day or so to get that page built and up. But what happens now, when we get those sample results, usually within 5 minutes or so of those coming to us, they're posted on that website.
So you get them to a lab?
They go to the labs. As results come back in, they're correlated by the National Guard team that's been at the water plant, put on a spreadsheet, emailed to us, and as soon as we get those, we post those on the
I'm
website.
more curious how long it takes from the time it comes, the test, how long it takes to do the test, how long does it take to do the test?
The testing time varies, is my understanding, based on the accuracy you want. So the tests that we're testing for 1 part per million did not take as long as the tests that go down to the 10 parts per billion. Initially, I think the tests were taking about, for the 1 part per million, we're taking about 40 minutes to an hour. And I think, from what I understand, talking to some of the lab folks, that the 10 parts per billion takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. But I can verify that for you.
Well, I noticed that you have yesterday's results already on your testing from yesterday for PPH.
And I might tell you, the more we've done, the better the labs have been to be able to turn these around.
And you use the word labs, but I noticed on your document sheet here, first of all, raw would be water straight from the river, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir. Raw water is water coming into the plant,
Finished would be what is
coming
out of the plant.
out of the plant after it's treated.
Okay. And then you have each area where you test. But on, you use the word labs, but on, why did you stop after the 16th? You only are using 1 lab after the 16th? There's only 1 lab's results listed on your data sheet. You no longer use them?
No, sir. They're still using. Actually, they're using 3 different labs right now. They're using the Health Department Bureau of Public Health lab, West Virginia Americans lab in Huntington, and a third-party lab in Beckley.
They're not listed on your spreadsheet.
I'll have to look, because some of those spreadsheets had sample numbers listed that had not been used yet, so
Okay.
that could be, but we'll check and see. But 40% of the samples are validated at 2 different labs to meet the EPA standard.
And I will note, according to your webpage, if it is accurate enough to date, the latest results, their ND is the
Non-detect.
right. It's
Yes, sir.
used throughout that since some time.
Non-detect is anything below 10 parts per billion.
Which then brings the question: why is it that we've had schools shut down if it's not detected? I was at a restaurant last night and people were complaining because they didn't want to wash their hands. You could smell it so bad at a particular restaurant. And I guess that's my question. It's not detected. What's happening?
The odor threshold for this product is considerably less than the 10 parts per billion. So you're going to be able to smell it a lot longer than it's going to be harmful. I can tell you that yesterday I had the opportunity to go with the governor to 3 different schools that had complained. We didn't see any issues in those schools. One of the principals had told us that they had several students that had stomach viruses and strep throat. So, until we actually find out exactly why these people were treated, is it directly related to the water or is it something else? I can't answer that question, but we have asked for that information, to determine what are the causes of some of these people getting sick.
Again, I commend you for what you've done, because you've done a tremendous job. And your website is very helpful, and I would encourage anyone to look at that website. The information is very, very beneficial. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Jeanette, following through on the idea of the samples and going to the schools and not see anything going on, could it be that this chemical could be releasing at certain times? And why I'm saying that is, this morning when I took a shower, I started smelling it again. It went away and then now it's back. I don't know why, but could it be that this oil or whatever, how it's circulating through the system gets caught somewhere and then all of a sudden released, and then you get the smell? Because at the restaurant that was close to the DEP headquarters, it was pretty bad in the bathroom and so forth. And people were literally complaining that the smell was coming back. It was pretty potent. I guess I don't know if it had ever gone away, but it was almost right next door to DEP's headquarters. So I'm just wondering, could this thing be coming in and out, or you test something and it's not there, and an hour later it comes back smelling again?
Yes, I really can't answer that. I can tell you that what the chemists have told us is that the coefficient that they look at that tells them whether or not this chemical bonds to different materials is of such that this product normally does not bond to pipes and things. And the EPA told us that again when they were here earlier this week. So I don't know if an area or a part of the system wasn't flushed and then it's coming back, or I really can't answer the question.
Right, and you're probably not. And then my understanding is NIH has put out, I guess, research to look at what types of plastic pipes and so forth this chemical would react to, or whatever. And I know you can't comment on that. But the one thing you might be able to comment on, you mentioned the 3 labs, and I'd be interested in knowing the lab in Beckley. You said the health department lab, right?
At Elkview, yes, sir.
Elkview, and then you have
West Virginia American
Water Company's lab in Huntington.
They have an EPA certified lab in Huntington, and then it's Reich Laboratories I think it's actually in Beaver.
In Beaver, right? Okay. My understanding, you also use the Matrix lab. Did you all use the Matrix lab?
Matrix did some testing. There was a company called Test America that did some testing. I think those were the primary companies, and Test America had 2 different locations that we used.
Now, I know that I guess you have the idea of redundancy of looking at different labs and coming up, but would you think that the West Virginia American Water Company lab might have a little bit of a conflict in the sense of getting results that show that nothing's in it? I don't know. I'm just thinking.
We've not seen any indication of that. Their samples have been consistent with the other labs, and they're an EPA certified lab, so they have to meet all the requirements of an EPA lab.
Okay, and the other question is, do we have any idea as far as continuing providing water? I know that the governor has extended providing water for the residents.
Yes, sir.
Until such time that confidence can be restored and people. Do you have any idea as far as what the future plans are to provide water?
We have been working with West Virginia American for over a week now. They have purchased 40 additional truckloads of water that we've distributed through our distribution network, and they have and they continue to supply tankers that we're putting out in the various locations around the county. In fact, all the bottled water has been dispersed, but we're still putting out the bulk water in the various communities. Those trucks are being filled at locations outside of the water that's been treated by the West Virginia American plant here in Charleston.
Okay. And as far as the sampling, instead of getting the chemical directly from Eastman, I would think that because we had been told that it was crude MCHM, and then 12 days later, oh, by the way, we have something called PPH in there, and oh, by the way, we don't know this, another, oh, by the way, that Delegate Manypenny makes a point, I think he was the one that brought it up in regards that wouldn't it be better if we took the sampling from actually the site and do the testing? Because if they were not honest in reporting PPH, they don't have a very good track record, I don't think, in being honest as far as reporting anything else. And I just want to know what that, oh, by the way, the other shoe falling. Would it not be more prudent to go there and get sampling and just test and see what chemicals were actually in that facility?
It's my understanding that the samples that were used to develop the protocols for testing the water were from the material at the Freedom site.
Okay.
I think where the product from Eastman came from is they were looking at samples to test raw MCHM to determine some of its other effects. So that would be something we'd have to ask the Bureau of Public Health, but the initial samples that were used to develop the testing methodology, I'm almost 100% sure came from the site itself.
Now, we also learned with Homeland Security at the time when 9/11 occurred, and there was a lot of infrastructure protection initiatives with the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and that all public water systems had to prepare a plan to protect their resource.
Yes, sir.
And we were told, actually, that I guess the Senate Judiciary Committee was told that many of these plans were done back around 2001, but not updated since that point. Now, I know that the Senate Bill 373 attempts to, I guess, mandate that these plans be updated, shared, and interagency sharing of that. But that would fall within your department not necessarily would be reported to you because that's your public health, but you would have access to those plans being under Homeland Security, would you not?
Actually, I think the way originally it was structured, all that went through the Bureau of Public Health.
Right.
But as part of what we're looking at going forward is we're looking at how we can make sure that those plans are available to the key people that need it. The local first responders are some of the first people that need that information because they're the people that are going to be there generally before we get there. So we're looking at ways of how we can share that information. We weren't actually included in the original discussions about the planning, but we're gonna work with DEP and DHHR to make sure that we develop some type of central repository for these plans and that somebody can review these plans and make sure that they get to the people that they need. One of the other things that we've already started to look at is looking at the GIS capabilities of if a call comes in from a facility that's had a spill in the river, being able to look at what else is downstream from that facility and being able to directly call those water companies. Right now, that normally goes to DEP, and then DEP generally calls those, but we're looking at putting some procedures in place that we can make those direct notifications.
Thank you. Senator Stollings, did you have a
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, I just want to make sure that, the Office of Mine Health and Safety and Training, they're aware of this. Is there more scrutiny on site now that since this has leaked? Director White,
I haven't talked to the director over there since this happened. I don't know if they're checking more about storage tanks on site. From what little bit of discussion I've had with some of the mines, they don't keep a large quantity of this on site. It's more they bring it in, use it, and it's a continual in and out process. So I don't think
Might be
we're.
something, again, just make sure that the scrutiny around the mine is more acute. And also, just for clarification, it's my understanding, having spoken with the governor and various other people, the intake is non-detectable in West Virginia American water.
Yes, sir.
And what comes out is not
Non-detectable, yes, sir.
And we're ongoingly testing that.
Right, and that, I think, is being tested at 2 parts per billion. The other thing, when we started having the heavy rains earlier in the week and the rivers began to come up, they started testing that every hour, just to make sure that they weren't seeing anything as a result of the runoff. And according to the reports from DEP, they saw no off-site release during the storms.
Last question, Senator Miller.
And I meant to ask this before, not so much what happened, but going forward. The material safety data sheets, do you have those are they filed with Homeland Security?
Yes, sir.
You have, according to the Chemical Safety Board, we don't have a lot of MSDS for a lot of chemicals. It's done by the companies.
I'm sorry, Miss. We have the Tier 2 sheets that are filed. We do not have the MSDSs.
Okay.
Those have to be maintained on site, and they're supposed to be sent to the local fire departments as well.
Okay. It would appear, and I'm just guessing, it would appear to me that it would be good, speculating that Homeland Security probably should have those on site too, I would think.
There's probably no way that we're going to maintain the MSDSs on every chemical that's filed with us. It's in the thousands and thousands of chemicals. What we do normally is we go online and search databases. There's databases of MSDS sheets that we subscribe to, and we usually go up, and that's what we did on this product. We went online.
So you have an online capacity.
But we also got it directly from the company, from DEP that morning that this happened.
All right, thank you.
Jimmy Gianato, thank you very much, and also I echo the committee's with your response. It was well done on your part, and all the local responders have worked tirelessly and continue to do so. And we just want to express our appreciation to you and all even the local, state, and emergency responders for this situation. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, sir.